Hello crafty friends, I'm Lynn from Studio Cato and I'm so glad you're joining me again today. Today I am making a circle card, which is really easy and I find it a really fun way to spice up your card design. For this card, I started out by die cutting a simple circle from some Canson Montval 200 GSM watercolor cardstock, and I put some pieces of double folded purple tape on the back to temporarily adhere it inside my MISTI. I did it this way because you can't really put a circle up in a corner and hope it stays in the same spot, so that's how I chose to do it this time. And I am prepping that cardstock with an anti-static powder bag because I will emboss the image that I'm stamping. Anti-static powder bag just makes it so the embossing powder doesn't stick anywhere it isn't supposed to. It doesn't stick to anywhere you didn't put ink down. So I'm stamping the winter wreath from My Favorite Things on there in Versamark ink. That's just a clear embossing ink. Any clear embossing ink will work. And I will emboss this in the Gold Rich Pale metallic embossing powder by Wow. I really like this gold because it's not too yellow, it's not too orange, it's a very neutral gold shade. Now I also stamped this little bear image from the Spa Day stamp set, also by My Favorite Things, and I stamped that in Versamark ink onto some more of that Canson Montval watercolor cardstock. I did also clear emboss this with Wow Clear Gloss Superfine embossing powder, and all of these names of products that I'm calling out, you can find them in the description box below if you're curious after the video. For once, I am just using my regular watercolors, not my Caran brush markers, and the watercolors I'm using are the Mijello Mission Gold watercolors. This is a really great palette. It's got really great color selection, especially if you like coloring flowers and critters. There are great pinks in there, and there are also some wonderful browns. And I'm going to walk you through the coloring process a little bit for this one. So this video is mostly coloring. If you don't like that, you can skip ahead, but there's not much else to this card, so I am just coloring the bear in with some brown first, and this is a brown that I mixed. I usually mix my watercolors to get the exact shade I want. And if you're curious, I might do a video just on mixing watercolors. I've learned a lot over the years, and mixing them is one of my favorite properties of this medium. So I'd love to talk more about it if you're interested. So just like with the Caran brush markers, I always just put down the paint in the areas I want darkest. Then I clean my brush with some water and pick up a little bit of water, but dab it off onto a cloth, so my brush isn't too wet when I bring it back to the paper. I can then just blend out the color that I put down and fade it out into a lighter shade. Now, just as with any coloring medium, I like to work in layers, so I am putting down a second layer on top of the brown I already put down. And if you do this, you want to make sure that your paint is completely dry before you go in with the second layer. You can add color to wet paint as well if you just want to deepen up the shadows. You can do that, but I find it easiest to make sure nothing goes wrong and everything stays smooth. For a nice smooth watercolor effect, you want to make sure your first layer is completely dry. With this bear, I thought the face was turning out a little bit too dark. So I went in while the paint was still wet to slightly take away some of that color I already put down. You can do that just by taking a brush that is almost dry and picking up some of the wet paint and then smoothing things out again. For the rope, I mixed a muted purple. Again, if you want a full video on mixing, let me know in the comments below. But for a muted purple, it's really simple. Just don't use pink. Use a blue and a red, a real true red instead of pink, and you will get a muted, more grayish purple. Now again, I am putting color down where I want everything to be darkest, and then take a clean brush with some water on it to smooth things out and blend it out into a lighter shade. Now, once again, because this is the biggest and most important tip I can give you for watercoloring, I am not using a lot of water or a lot of paint. Every time I pick up some paint and some water, I dab it off onto a cloth so my brush isn't too wet. The wetter your brush is, the less control you have over where the water will flow and how smooth your coloring will be. If you end up with streaks and splotches in your watercolor painting at the end, that's most likely because your paint was wetter in one area than another. And that gives you some weird effects that are beautiful. They can be wonderful for flowers and loose watercolor painting, but that's just not what I was going for. And if that's not what you're going for, you want to be careful of your water control. I find that using a regular brush helps a lot with that, and again, have a cloth off to the side so you can dab off any excess paint or water on your brush. If you're having trouble watercolor painting and you're using one of those fancy water brushes, ones that have a reservoir for water and you squeeze on it and some more liquid comes out, I love those. I think they are wonderful for people who can use them, but I think they're for a very specific purpose, and that purpose for me is not coloring in detailed images. So if you're having trouble with that and you're using one of those brushes, try a regular brush. They are a lot easier to get some control over your water. Now, as you can see, somewhere along the coloring process, my rope changed color. It was a very muted bluish grayish purple, and now it's more red. I kept the purple I mixed for the first layer, but before I painted the second layer, I mixed in some more red and some pink to make it a little more lively. I wanted to add some teal to this, and before I painted the second layer of the rope, I realized that would make it really cold if I kept the very muted purple I used before. So to warm the image up a little bit, I added some pink and red. This also makes for a nicer contrast with the teal I am using. And if, like many others, you've already started on your Christmas cards, this is a great Christmas card combo. I used this teal and burgundy color for a lot of Christmas cards last year, and I probably will again this year. I love this a lot more than the punchy red and green that are for classic Christmas cards. And I really like how the muted colors complement the brown instead of overtake it. I think coloring in critters in brown and then giving them bright accessories is super fun, but the critter almost disappears in them. I don't think that's the case when you're using a little bit more muted colors. Now once I'm done coloring in this bear, I let it dry completely and then I fussy cut it out. Now for the magical simple way on how to create a circular card base, it's really simple. I folded a card base slightly larger than the die I used before for the piece I stamped my wreath on, and I let that die hang over the folded edge. Just a little bit. I taped that in place, and where the die hangs over the folded edge, that means the folded edge will stay in place. You will maintain that fold once it's die cut. Now, I've never had problems with this, but if you can't get this through your die cutting machine, don't force it through. You can try to change up your sandwich, or you could make a circle card in a different way. Cut 2 separate circles with the same die and score one. This one will be the back of your card. Score that near the top, just a straight line, and adhere it above the score line to the second circle you cut. This will also create a fold. You might want to use double-sided adhesive for this instead of liquid glue, so it definitely doesn't shift around. Or if you're more patient than I am, you could of course use liquid glue and put it under something heavy and wait for it to dry. Now, while I explained that whole thing that I didn't do in this video, I did adhere the bear and the sentiment strip on top of my card with some foam tape. Now for a super simple envelope, I am once again using my We Are Memory Keepers 123 punch board and some patterned paper. This is again a super simple envelope. You could add more to this, but I honestly didn't have the time. I was planning a whole different envelope design for this card and ran out of time. Now, for a circle card, obviously there aren't specific instructions on the 123 punch board. Just take the square envelope, the square card instructions, and use the diameter of your circle die to determine the size. The circle die I use for this is just between two sizes of envelopes, and this is slightly too large, but the other size is slightly too small, so I always go for the slightly too large one, of course. A super simple envelope and a super simple card as well. I really like how they turned out, especially the colors. You can see them better in the picture later. There it is. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave your thoughts in the comments below. And let me know if you want that video on watercolor mixing. If you want to see more of my videos, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And you can also find me on Instagram and on a blog. You can find those links in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.